Good morning, grace and peace. We're glad to have you here today to worship God with us and to approach His Word and His table together. Miami Heat is in the finals. Tonight is game two, right? Tonight is game two. I'm praying that God would give them the victory, slay the giants on the other side. I've started watching the Heat play this season when the playoffs started. That tells you how good of a fan I am. I had no idea they made it to the playoffs. And when I heard that they were in the playoffs, okay, maybe I'll start watching them. And I started following some of the players on Instagram and following the team on Instagram. And you know what happens, right? When you start following a specific sport or celebrities, they start to feed you more and more information about that particular field of content because our phones, our devices, our electronic devices, our social media apps, they have these algorithms that the more you search a content, they put you in these content funnels and they give you more and more and more and you begin to drown in them, right? So I found myself one night this past week watching these old Michael Jordan videos that were fed to me. I never chose to watch them, but they were fed to me, and I was just watching his plays. And I'm not particularly a big basketball fan, but I was just watching his plays, and I was appreciating him. He's got to be the best. I was making, just watching it one after the other, and then they're beginning to send me ads for buying jerseys and Air Jordans and all that sort of thing. And then I was thinking about our lives in this modern world. How we've been fed so much information and so much content, and it's come to us at our own deliberate choice in terms of that which we are after, but the volume has not been our choice. And what that has done to us is that has turned us into specialists in the things that we find particular interest in. We become real specialists in these things, whether it's politics or business or sports, whatever you have interest in, the technological world has designed to give you more of that. Become very good at it, very knowledgeable about it, but it makes you ignorant about the reality of other people because it throws you into this echo chamber. And so you know less and less. We've become more and more ignorant. We've known less and less about other people's ideas and thoughts and perspectives and reality. And that has affected every single area of our lives, including our relationships. We have become poorer and poorer in terms of resolving conflict in our relationships because we are unaware, and we're becoming even more unaware of other people's realities. All we want to listen to are people that think like us, they act like us, they have the same desires that we do, and because of that, we have failed to understand the perspective of the other. It has affected our marriages, it affected our friendships, it affected our business relationships, it affected our relationships with our neighbors. That's just the world in which we live in. So as we are approaching the end of this series on relationships entitled Woven Stories, I think we have this week and maybe another week left. I want us to talk about the biblical perspective about approaching conflicts. Let me say something about conflicts before we get to the text. Conflicts are not necessarily bad, okay? Jesus was in conflict with people when you read the gospel accounts. Conflicts are not bad. If they are dealt with properly, what it does, it matures us. It brings us closer to one another. As a matter of fact, the closer you are to people, you bump heads, right? Like I'm really close to my wife, and the closer we are, the more heads we bump. But if you don't have a healthy way to address conflicts, then it becomes a problem. You lose as a person. Your relationships lose. But if you learn ways of how to address, biblical ways of how to address your conflicts in the context of your relationships, you can not only grow as a person, but your relationships will thrive as well. So I want to go to Matthew chapter 7 with you today. And we're going to read the first verses of Matthew 7. And before we read, let me give you a little bit of background on Matthew 7. Matthew 7 is part of what we all know as the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' greatest body of teachings. It's recorded in scriptures. It goes from chapter 5 through chapter 7 of Matthew. And towards the end of his sermon in chapter 7, Jesus gives us some real practical advice of how to approach our conflicts. And he uses two very famous illustrations for us to learn from how to do that. And I'll get to these illustrations later. But this is what the text says. This is Jesus. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite! You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. This is the word of the Lord. So, what pathway does this body of teaching of Jesus provide us in order for us to approach the conflicts that we go through in life? First, it gives us the posture. It teaches about the posture that we should all have as we address conflicts in life. It shows us, number two, the method of Jesus. It gives us the method of Jesus of how to resolve conflict. And then thirdly, we learn about the power that we need in order to have the posture that's outlined here and to apply the method that's presented to us. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. Posture, method, power. Posture. The very first words that we read today, verse 1, which is probably nowadays, I think the most famous verse in the Bible. It used to be John 3:16, but because we live in an individualistic culture where we're always saying to one another, well, you do you, you don't let anybody tell you how you should live your life. This has become the most famous verse. People have tattooed it in their body. Judge not, that you be not judged. What does Jesus mean, after all, when he says, judge not? Is Jesus saying that we should not disagree with people's opinions? That we should not point out people's habits that we think are destructive? Is the Bible saying that we should offer no criticism at all at people? Is the Bible saying to us that we are forbidden from doing Yelp reviews when we go to a bad restaurant? Is the Bible saying you should not judge, don't write that review? Is that what it's saying? Bad Amazon reviews. Some of you are great at that. You do a lot of that. I know it. Is the Bible saying that you should therefore approach your boss and says, judge not, no performance reviews for me. You're not allowed to judge me. Is that what the Bible is saying? The Bible is not, Jesus is not prohibiting any of us from having any opinions on matters of life and practice and ideas. As a matter of fact, in the parallel passage in Luke chapter 6, where Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is also recorded, Jesus says, right there in chapter 6 of Luke, you can judge a tree by its fruit. So Jesus is not forbidding us to have opinions and to give pushbacks. He's not forbidding us from doing these things. What he is forbidding us is to sentencing and passing judgment on people, giving them a sentence, condemning them. Again, in Luke chapter 6, what Jesus says is, do not condemn. Do not judge, but then he follows with, do not condemn. What Jesus wants us to understand is that we have to be very careful when we are facing any form of conflict, that we do not take the judgment seat that only belongs to God, the seat where the sentence comes from. When the Bible speaks that Jesus one day will return and he will judge the living and the dead, that's what the Bible is saying, that Jesus will come to sentence those that have lived their life according to their beliefs and their works and their practices. The Bible forbids us from condemning and sentencing people based on our own perspective of things. Why? Because we are not fit to sit on that seat. In order for you to judge, you have to have the full picture, the full perspective. And oftentimes, when we approach conflict in our lives, we fail to see the full picture of what's happening in someone else's heart, what's the dream behind their struggle. We fail to understand all the circumstances and the situation that surrounds the person which we are and maybe in conflict with. I don't know if you've seen this video that has gone viral, and it is a video of this 93-year-old man sitting in front of a judge because he had sped through a school zone. Have you seen that video? There's this man, old man, 93 years old, he's in front of this judge, and the judge starts off by saying to him, "Sir," states his name, "you have received a ticket for speeding in a school zone." And then that old man offers to the judge some perspective of what happened. He said, "Hey, I have a 63-year-old son. I usually don't drive. I'm too old to drive. But my son, who only has me to help him, has cancer. And I had to take him to do his blood work. And I was in a bit of a hurry because we were running late in our appointment." And then the judge stops and says, "You were helping your son. You're a 93-year-old man. Helping your 65-year-old son." He says, "More people need to learn with you." And then he dismisses his case. Right. Well, because he now has a full perspective of what has happened and has taken place. And how many times have we passed judgment and condemned people without the full picture of what's happening and taking place? We love to take God's judgment seat. Any time that we take a position that only belongs to God, we are setting ourselves and whoever is involved in conflict with us for a major disaster. It's like putting a 5-year-old behind the steering wheel of a car. We are unfit to take on that spot. And that's why Jesus uses this metaphor and this illustration to drive this point further home into our hearts. He talks about this idea of a speck and a log. And what Jesus is trying to get us to understand with this idea of the speck and the log is that we lack the qualities. We lack the characteristics that are necessary for a proper conflict resolution every time that we approach conflict. This is something that we must examine. It's something that we are asked to look into our own hearts, into our own minds, into our own lives. Jesus says that we lack integrity. He points out to the fact, look at verse 3. Read verse 3 again. He says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" What Jesus is saying is like we lack integrity. We lack integrity because we do not acknowledge that maybe some of the problems that we are able to see in others are problems that we struggle with ourselves. Wise people will say that if you can spot it, you got it. If you spot it, you got it. Usually when you are bothered by someone's pride is because your heart is also filled with pride. Usually when you're bothered by someone's materialism is because you struggle with materialism. Usually when you are bothered by people's lack of kindness is because you tend to be a rude person as well. And so Jesus wants us, as he gives us this body of teaching, to ask the question, before approaching someone on a particular topic or issue that I'm bothered by, do I have these same struggles in my life? Am I able to go to them with a clear conscience that I don't struggle in any way with that which I am pointing out in them? Jesus also makes sure that we understand that we also lack not just integrity when we approach conflict, but we lack humility as well. Look at what he says now in verse 4, continuing in verse 4. He says, "Or how can you say to your brother or sister, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is this log in your own eye. And in verse 5, he says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Why is it that oftentimes Jesus is pointing out that when I'm trying to address a conflict, I'm coming from a position of superiority? That I can be the one to make the person see, that I can be the one to heal, that I can be the one to fix that person's problem. Why is it that I have that sense of arrogance? Jesus is saying, check your arrogance at the door. You are as a sinner as the person that you are in conflict with is a sinner. It's very clear in the Sermon on the Mount. Remember the Beatitudes? It starts with acknowledging our poverty. We are all in the same plane. We are all in the same place. And yet many times we cannot help ourselves when we are approaching a person that we are in conflict with a position of superiority. The truth is that we lack humility and we all need help. Jesus is very clear in this body of teaching. He is compelling us to acknowledge that we all have an eyesight problem. We are all blind. I have progressively becoming more and more, I guess it's my age, but nowadays I need glasses. I walk around now, if you guys been with me in meetings, one-on-one meetings, that I carry around these reading glasses, because I've noticed that I was making all these mistakes and these typos, and I was misreading people's texts because I did not have spectacles on that would allow me to see in close proximity. And, at one point it was, I could use it here and there, and now I almost have to wear it all the time. And I hate glasses, right? So I don't know if I should do LASIK or if I should get contacts, but I just hate glasses. But I have to wear them. I'm wearing progressive lens right now so I can see you and the text at the same time. But it is a problem. It is a problem when we cannot see things clearly. This is what this passage is about. See, a speck in someone else's eyes, I probably could see because it's at a distance. In my eye, I can't see a speck. A speck in my eyes turns into a log, right? Because the closer it is to my eye globe, it becomes a huge log. And Jesus is saying we all have, not him including, but you all have that problem. And you must check your arrogance. You must check your lack of integrity at the door every time you approach a broken relationship. Every time that you are addressing conflict, you should acknowledge that you need help. And I love this illustration here, and sometimes we fail to understand the depth of this illustration because back in those days, they didn't have mirrors, so today, if you have a speck in your eye, what do you do? Like you're out, doing the lawn and something goes into your eye. What do? You go to the bathroom and you look into a mirror and you're like, oh, it's here, and you're trying to, do something to remove it. I don't know how would you use your hands to remove it, but you at the very least you go to a mirror so that you can see where it's at. Back in those days, they didn't have mirrors, and the only way, therefore, that you could have something remove it is if you had the help of someone else. See, what Jesus is acknowledging is you can't do this yourself. You need someone else's help. You need someone else's assistance. You need someone else's work in your life. And in order for that to happen, you have to have humility. This is the right posture. It leads us to the second point, which is the method. And we are Christians, and we like to talk about the fact that we are followers of Jesus, that we are trying to grow in the character of Jesus. And when we read what the character of Jesus looks like in the gospel accounts, if you go to John chapter 1, verse 14, after John introduces Jesus as the one who was with the Father before all things were created, he was God's agent of creation. He goes on and he talks about the character of Jesus right there in verse 14, right? Remember? And he says something about Jesus that is poignant, but it is fundamental to understanding Jesus' full humanity that envelops his full divinity. He says that Jesus was filled with truth and grace. And that allowed us to see the glory of the Father. Every time that Jesus is giving instruction of how to heal and how to repair and how to reconcile, how to move in the direction of the gospel, Jesus always does it couched by this understanding of truth and love, the balance of truth and love. Because at the end of the day, truth without love is not truth, and love without truth is not love. And therefore, the last illustration that Jesus uses in this passage is to drive this point home. So I don't know if sometimes we misapply this illustration. I've misapplied it before. I gave it more thought and read more commentaries. And when he says here, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, it almost seems abrupt. It doesn't fit in to what he's talking about here. What is Jesus talking about when he says that we are not to throw pearls to pigs? In the context of conflict resolution. Pearl is a piece of jewelry. It's a valuable thing. It was valuable back then, and it's valuable today. And then on the other side of the pearl in this illustration, there is a hog, a pig that does not understand the worth and the value of the pearl. A pig is looking for something to eat. The pig will eat anything. In fact, if you've raised pigs, I haven't, but I know that pigs will eat anything that it's able to digest. But a pig cannot digest a valuable piece of jewelry. And what Jesus is trying to get us to understand is that oftentimes we bring valuable insight into conflict, valuable insight, but we have the wrong posture and the wrong gesture. We're offering sometimes the truth without the kindness that it needs in order for it to be digested. The key thing for you to understand here is the verb that's used. Do not throw pearls to pigs. Why? Because things that are valuable, you don't throw, you offer. You don't throw. Think about this. Maybe you've been through this before. This is a story that may have or may not have happened in my life. But think about this. Think about you have a spouse and your anniversary date is approaching. And you start thinking about that day. It's a special day for you, and you begin to look for a special gift for your spouse. And you find the gift, and you say, oh, this gift would be perfect. And you go on and you buy the gift. It's an expensive gift. And the day arrives, and you go home, and your spouse says, I can't believe you. Like, what? You forgot, didn't you? I mean, you're saving it for a surprise, but then it becomes an argument, and you take the gift, here, this is what I was doing, and you throw the gift at the person. Will that go well? You took something valuable, and you did not offer. You threw at. Or you cook a nice meal, and you spent all this time learning the recipe, and you follow the recipe, and you cook that meal, and the person that you cook the meal for takes a bite at it and says, it's okay. Your desire is to take that plate. Just leave it at that. How many times have we thrown that which is valuable and precious instead of offering that which is valuable and precious? If the posture was different, if the gesture was different, maybe it would have changed. But this idea of throwing implies a few things that Jesus wants us to acknowledge and recognize here. First, when you throw, you do it at a distance. There's no proximity. You're detached oftentimes with your feelings, emotionally detached. You are distanced relationally from the person. How does it feel when somebody that doesn't know you well and doesn't know what you're going through and what you're struggling with comes and offers a critique of something that you're doing in particular? It hurts, right? Because you're like, hey, you don't know me. But when there's proximity, when there's intimacy, it's taken differently. And this is what Jesus wants us to understand. Jesus wants us to also understand in this metaphor that sometimes we also weaponize knowledge to get our point across. You know, I'm a pastor, and it bothers me if Beth were to come to me and say, hey, I noticed this in your life. You're a pastor. I can't believe you forgot those biblical passages, Bible juking me. Or if I go to her, she's a therapist, and starts using therapeutic counseling terms to try to address a situation in her life. That is weaponizing knowledge in order to get your point across. That's throwing pearls. And Jesus is saying, you must not do this. That's offering the truth in a harsh and aggressive way. And instead of getting the outcome that you may think you need, which is the repair, you're going to escalate the matters. Look at what he says. If you do that to pigs, what will they do? They will trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. The hog will take a bite at that pearl. Oh, I can't digest that. But he probably looks at you and says, I can digest you. And he comes after you. It escalates the matter. How many times that has happened in our lives? And therefore, what we need to do now is we need to go back to the first illustration that Jesus gives. Because which brings us the idea that everything, every truth that we bring forth has to be sheltered and covered with love and grace and mercy and kindness. In the first illustration, think about this. When I used to get splinters or, specks in my eyes when I was a kid, playing soccer outside in the streets of Brazil, I would come home and my mom would say, let me see. And I'm like, no, don't touch it. And then she would come very gently, right? She has to come close. And then she would open my eyes and she would do one of two things. She would either blow inside my eye or she would pour water on my eyes. But it required care, proximity. She didn't come at me with a blowtorch. She didn't come at me with sandpaper. She didn't come with me with a screwdriver. And so many of you have been permanently blinded because the people that have come to you, they've come with these type of destructive tools. That's what trauma is. And it has removed your ability to perceive reality in the world around you because truth was brought in such an aggressive way that it ended up blinding you. And Jesus is saying, do it, but do it with kindness. At the end of the day, truth without love is selfishness, and love without truth is selfishness too. Somebody that is afraid of pointing out wrongs does so because they want to protect their reputation. They want to protect the relationship at the cost of that person's demise. The person who offers truth without love is selfish too because all they care is about being right. And all they think of is themselves. And Jesus is saying, avoid all of this. Find balance as you approach resolution in your conflict. That leads us obviously to point 3. And I hope that up to this point you've realized that all of this is very hard for us. This is hard work. Like I said in the beginning, we are all blind. We all have our eyesight, our spiritual eyesight, and our eyesight impaired. We have blind spots. All of us have that. We need the help of Jesus. Jesus is saying, remember again, you cannot do this by yourself. You need help. And so he comes. Why does Jesus come? He comes to restore our eyesight so that we're able to see ourselves clearly and we're able to see him clearly. In this illustration that Jesus gives us of the pearl, the one who casts pearls, and the pigs on the other side, we are not the one casting the pearls in this story. We are the pigs. Jesus has come and he has offered that which is most precious to us, which is the gospel. If you read more of the gospels, you know that Jesus compares a pearl with the gospel. He says there was this man who one time found a pearl of great worth, and what did he do? He sold everything that he had in order to possess it. You know, the power that you need, the power that I need in order for us to approach our relationships with humility and apply this method of truth and love that Jesus has to offer us is only found in the power of the gospel. How can we find the gospel clearly in this passage? Well, Jesus is the one who offers us the gospel. And how did we treat him? As pigs. You know, pigs back in those days were, and dogs too, were ceremonially unclean animals. And instead of finding appreciation, we attacked him. We shred him to pieces. And on the cross, Jesus was crucified in our logs, that which impairs our vision, to be able to see the needs of others. This is our sin on the cross. Paul talks about that in 2 Corinthians 5, that he who knew no sin became sin for us so that we could become the righteousness of God in him. Only by looking at the crucified Savior on our behalf can we have our vision restored. Only by looking at him and what he has done on our behalf can we see our blind spots, that we are undeserving of his mercy and his grace, of his precious gift of salvation, the pearl that's been offered to us. It's only by looking at the crucified Savior in our place that we can find appreciation for the grace of God. And it's to the degree that I dwell in that reality of what Jesus has done for you and I on the cross, of how he approached conflict and resolved conflict by giving up of himself, because you always have to give up something, but he gave up of himself for our sake, that we're able to find the humility that we need and apply the method that he offers us in order to bring healing into our relationships. When we do that, you know what that does? Three things, and I'm going to end with this. First, it will open our eyes to see ourselves clearly and to see others clearer, and to see the love and the grace of God that's been lavished on us clearly. It opens our hearts. It takes down our defenses as we approach others. There is a desire, there's a dream behind the conflict, which is to heal and to restore. And then thirdly, it opens our hands to minister, to heal, and to give up control. And this is where we find ourselves today. We find ourselves today in front of the table that the Lord has prepared for us. This is a table that all of those that are able to see, they are able to see that we are not deserving of this table. We don't deserve to sit at this table, but we can sit at this table because Jesus did what was necessary so that people like you and I can sit at his table and fellowship with him and have a relationship that's been repaired and restored in him. And out of that table, move into the world so that we can also seek repair in our relationships and approach conflict with the right posture, with the right heart, and the right way. I want to invite you to the Lord's Supper. It's here on the side. Let me move here. In the night that the Lord Jesus Christ was betrayed, he takes the bread and he breaks it and he says, "This is my body broken for you. I want you to eat it and do this in remembrance of me." And after breaking the bread, the Lord Jesus takes the cup and he says, "This is my blood spilled for you. I want you to drink it and do this in remembrance of me." Every time that we eat of this bread and we drink of this cup, no, we don't need to move it. Thank you, brother. It's okay here. Every time that we eat of this bread and we drink of this cup, we are proclaiming to ourselves and to one another. We're making a statement to our souls, and we're making a statement to one another that despite the fact that we are broken, we are loved by God because Jesus was broken in our place. And we deserve God's displeasure, but because of Christ, we have his acceptance and his love. Today, if you have clearly deposited your life's trust and hope in Jesus, this table is for you. None of us have it all together. I am as a sinner as you are, but there's hope for every sinner here in this room if they put their faith and trust in Jesus.